This is John Jackson Miller, writer of Star Wars comics and novels, and you're listening to Star Wars with Stevie B. May the Force be with you.
Hey, what's going on, everyone? Welcome back to the show. I got Xezene here with us. Our first conversation was absolutely incredible. It was amazing. I highly suggest you go back and listen to it if you haven't, because there was so much information that this gentleman has provided and dug up for us. It's insane. So I wanted to get him back on. I wanted to get talking and just go from there and just experience and unload some more of that knowledge that you have, sir. But how are you doing?
Doing all right. Hey, thanks for saying all that. It was a fun conversation last time, and yeah, I'm always down to do it.
Yeah, I'm glad. I'm glad we could. We were talking a little bit before we kicked off here. I was looking out my window, and there was a gentleman riding his lawnmower down the road here, and it's raining out. So it just kind of threw me off, and then it brought me back to a story about my great grandfather. If you don't mind me just saying this real quick, but as he got elderly, he lived close to a saloon, so he lived out in the county, we'll say, and his nephew would take the keys away from him, so he couldn't drive down to the saloon because he liked to have beer. Well, he used to take the riding lawnmower down there, and then they had to take the keys for that too. So it just kind of it was just a memory thing for me, and I just thought it was funny. I wanted to share.
Yeah. I get that.
But so I wanted to get you on here. I wanted to start having that conversation, getting deep in with it. But so what's new with you? How are you doing?
I'm doing fine. Living life. We have spring coming here, and it's been warming up, so I really like that. And in terms of Star Wars, I haven't been thinking actively about it lately, but just as of late, kind of getting back into it. And then, of course, I think on Thursday, I will be seeing Return of the Jedi at the cinema, which I'm very excited for, because really, I think, I love the 6 Star Wars movies that George made. I love all of them, but I think the 6th one is really my favorite. So
yeah, it's a toss up between that and A New Hope for sure. For me, that is.
Funny thing. Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say they're both phenomenal.
Yeah. Funny thing about that, years ago, I didn't put this anywhere on the internet. This is just for my own interest. But I had looked around. I had been, on the force.net, and I had thought of maybe putting it on there. But I had looked around just to see how popular the films were globally, which films were people's favorites. And I was very interested to see, internationally, that when you ask people, if you go outside the bounds of something like IMDb and you go to other movie rating websites in other languages from other nations, and you see how they rank these. I mean, the first thing you'll notice is that the prequels hang not that far behind the originals. The gap is much less than it is on something like IMDb. And then, of course, typically the sequels and the new films are at the bottom. But what I found was interesting was Return of the Jedi was very frequently listed as tied for number 1, or sometimes number 1, sometimes number 2. Internationally, Return of the Jedi is really loved. And even in America, I think people underestimate. I know there's this whole idea that, well, it's considered the worst of the 3. But if you actually look at how people feel about it, typically the favorites you'll see mentioned are Return of the Jedi, Empire Strikes Back, and Revenge of the Sith.
Yeah. Well, they're all incredible.
Yeah.
And I'm jealous that you're getting to go to see that in the theater. I mean, I really am. I was seeing some people post now where they're giving out the poster of the new art for it at certain theaters, I guess.
Oh, are they?
Yeah.
Wow, that's
so
cool.
It's like, I really would like to get one of those.
It kind of breaks my heart. I saw Star Wars last year in theater. That was amazing. And sadly, I really have no excuse for this. I just didn't see that they had listed that they were showing Empire Strikes Back that later that year, and I didn't see it. I would have loved to see that, but Return of the Jedi, I would be excited to see.
Yeah, well, I would too. I mean, I'm sure it's just packed in there, and everybody's got their lights. I bet it's just a blast. It's just that feeling of happiness and joy that movie gives off as well. I mean, it ties it up. Right?
Yeah, and I was on cloud 9. I mean, it was packed last time when they showed Star Wars. It was just perfect with the opening. I mean, it has one of the most amazing openings, even if you're not a Star Wars fan. Just from a cinema perspective, you're just setting everything going with that humongous Star Destroyer that just keeps going and going and going, and you just can't believe the enormity of what you're experiencing with the music and everything. I mean, it's just really pure filmmaking. You know, George Lucas as a filmmaker, it's amazing.
Yeah, I'm like they said, lightning in a bottle. I mean, you can't. There's, you know, another thing I wanted to mention too is I was thinking about this before our conversation. It's like certain films just don't age well, and I know that's probably talked about already, or it's a common question, thought, whatever. But I was thinking that the other day because I was actually watching Conan the Barbarian, you know, with Arnold.
Yeah,
I grew up watching that as a kid, and it was great. But but now I'm looking at it, and I'm like, ooh. I mean, it's still a good movie, but it's like,
Yeah, you know, you have 70s sci-fi is like that. You've got movies like, you know, Silent Running and Logan's Run and things like this that when you watch it now, you feel that age. But then you have a movie, I mean, Star Wars, obviously, but then you have a movie, and actually, I'm really thinking more like something like Alien.
Oh, yeah.
You watch Alien and you go, was this made yesterday? This is crazy.
Yeah, some of the effects in there, and then obviously the aliens themselves just looked. I used to be kind of scared of that a little bit.
Yeah, some of the way that they shot those movies, I think Star Wars bringing in that whole idea of a used future, and then you're trying to be more cinematic with how you approach everything. I mean, we really have Star Wars to thank for all this great sci-fi that came right after that.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. I mean, 100%. You were mentioning the music in earlier. You know, you haven't really thought much of Star Wars. And the last time we chatted, you mentioned that music. You were listening to John Williams music, and it brought you back.
Yeah.
Do you listen to his music a lot? I mean, is that something that that's impactful for you?
Yeah, I'm a huge. You know, I used to actually play. So I am a musician. I play
Nice.
guitar and sing, but I used to play in the orchestra. So I've always loved orchestra music. Yeah, I mean, even really since I was an infant. And so, yeah, I love John Williams' music, and sort of goes beyond Star Wars. I mean, his music for many, many films is incredible.
And certain films have. I love scores or soundtracks, as I like to call them. There's certain films that just have great music, even if it's not orchestra.
Yeah, when I was growing up, I bought the Star Wars trilogy, the special edition, two disc for each film. It's a 6-disc set for the original trilogy. It was the music that was in the whole film, right? So everything. And I used to listen to that, when I do homework or different things. And the amazing thing about that was I had seen the film so many times, and then I would hear the music that it was sort of a way to watch the movies without watching them, because I knew what was happening in every scene, even the dialogue. You could just hear the music and go, oh yeah, this is when this happens. You just picture it in your head. I love the fact that music could sort of do that,
Oh yeah, it's powerful. And I used to do my homework listening to music too, but I would listen like old rock and roll, heavy metal. Like I like all genres of music now. I dabbled in the drums a little bit, in the guitar, but nothing. I wouldn't call myself a musician at all.
Lately, when it comes to Star Wars, I have been listening more to like the episode 2 score, the full score. Okay. Now it's hard to find because unfortunately Lucasfilm never released officially the full score of the second and third films. But because of video games reusing the music from the films, there have been some really clever people out there who have they've cobbled it all together. Back. And so if you know where to look, you can find these. And I've listened to episode 2 and 3, the full scores, and it's just incredible, especially episode 2. You just listen and you're like, this is so different than everything else. I mean, the percussion, and you have these medieval harps, and it's very courtly and but it's also very epic. I mean, it's pure Star Wars right there.
Yeah, I kind of kicked myself because years ago, a friend and I had tickets to go to Star Wars in concert, and there was all around this expo center, there was statues and props from the film, and these big murals that you could take your picture with, and Chewbacca was in it. it was great, but we didn't stay around for the music. We just kind of poked our heads in and listened for a second, and it just, oh my goodness, I'm mad that I didn't go to that.
I would have loved to see that too. I've never actually had the chance to see that.
No, it would, but it's like, well, you live and you learn, But like you said, trying to find the music, some stuff is very hard, and it's kind of. I'm glad people are kind of getting this, just like yourself, what you're doing and what you're bringing everyone's attention. Things, I was looking at some of your stuff today and this morning, and I'm like, man, this is some good stuff.
I appreciate you saying that. Yeah, it's fun finding these things, and sometimes it blows your mind. I mean, when I found the transcript of the conversation between Alan Dean Foster and George Lucas to make Splinter of the Mind's Eye, I just couldn't believe that was even. Firstly, I couldn't believe that was a conversation that was recorded, let alone transcribed. And I couldn't believe, there are many parts of that are very amusing if you read that conversation. Got to give credit to J.W. Rinsler and Insider for getting that together. But
yeah, you mentioned you had a little bit of an interaction with him as well.
Very
brief. Yeah.
I had he was doing the Alien novels, or the Alien behind the scenes, and I had asked him if Fox was interested in him doing Alien 3, because the production of the film was an absolute nightmare. And so it would have been interesting to read, but he goes, no, Fox isn't. They don't really want me to write about that one. And so, but unfortunately, it was not long after that he got ill and unfortunately died.
Okay. Yeah. It's kind of it. Yeah. So I take it you're a big Alien fan too. It sounds like.
I do like the first 3 films quite a bit. Initially, I was more of a fan of the first 2, and I never really gave the third movie much of my attention. But I saw the assembly cut, which they put out on Blu-ray, which is, it was not done with David Fincher's leadership, but they went off of his notes to try to make this film what it was. They cut out like a half hour of it when they released it. So when you actually see the film the way it was meant to be seen, and then with the Elliot Goldenthal music, I really quite like it. And so yeah, I see those movies as kind of a trilogy. That's Ripley's story. I know they made other films afterwards, but yeah, I like those 3. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, there's nothing like the originals. You know what I mean? And that's anything, we'll say. Even things that were remade, other genres of movies and such, normally, well, I guess some we'll say, are done a little better, but
it's very hard to do. It's very hard to make something again, because that they have an old saying in Hollywood. The hardest thing about a sequel is that the audience, what they want is that they want it to be different, and they want it to be more of the same. So how do you give them both at the same time? And that's a sequel. So like making one sequel is hard enough. Making a second sequel actually work is extremely difficult. That's why if you look through the history of movies, to find a third film that's really good is hard. It's really hard. And after that, a lot of franchises kind of spiral into self-parody. It's very hard to do it again after that. And still, that's why people like Gene Roddenberry with The Next Generation for Star Trek, or George for the prequels, they kind of just went with a totally new vision once you get that far along. Because you just say, well, I really can't I'm not interested in doing more of the same when we've already done it so many times.
Well, that, we could say that, that can fall into the music, and also, the Bantam era books of the EU. Not that there's nothing wrong with them, because they're great, but like, it's always the same kind of story.
Yeah. New Jedi Order was sort of, in some ways, the attempt to be that Star Trek The Next Generation, that we are going to do it, but we're going to do a new generation, a new frontier. It's going to be different than it's been.
Yeah. Oh yeah. We're going to talk a little bit about NJO, because I'm considering going to start reading that here. With just how much it's just, I want to be involved a little deeper with the attention of that,
It's quite a ride.
Yeah. It's a long series, but that's okay. And you said you were keeping track of, at one point you went to see how the movies all stacked up, we'll say, right? You had the chart. Also, I see that you did something like that with the NJO releases of the books too, which we'll talk on, which I thought was really cool. how they rated on the charts, when they came out.
Yeah, that was really neat. I mean, I don't know if you wanted to show that, but that's
I have that ready to go. I'm just gonna have to find it through my list here of files. Just bear with me, folks. There we go. Right here.
It's nuts. So yeah, I mean, I did go through, it's one of those things where once I realized what I had to do to make that post, I thought, well, okay, I'll do it. So over the course of, I think, some weeks, I went through, and yeah, the New York Times, they have an archive of their print releases. They keep track of bestsellers. Usually top 15 is what they consider bestsellers. And it's really nuts. The NJO, we could talk a little bit about the financial success of that series. So, I mean, the New Jedi Order was an ambitious undertaking. I mean, Del Rey and Bantam were in a bidding war to, have the Star Wars license. And then eventually, it's kind of ironic. Del Rey won, but then Random House, I think, bought Bantam or something like this. And so they all moved into the same house anyway. But when they started publishing them, they were hoping they would be successful. I mean, that's why they did the Mark Hamill commercial, which I did do a remaster of that on my channel, which, by the way, it was recently came to my attention that Mark Hamill had seen the remaster and he liked it, but he didn't remember doing it. So I was really excited to see that.
That's cool.
But yeah, but they put up the commercial and they were hoping it would do well because the sales of the novels had fallen a bit into a slump. I mean, when Heir to the Empire was launched, it was weeks and weeks and weeks on the New York Times bestseller list. Went to #1. Crazy. They literally ran out of prints. They had to keep printing. And you had dozens of weeks on the list. And then if you count the hardcover and paperback, then you had other books, Jedi Academy books. And then you had the, even things like Children of the Jedi, Crystal Star did very well on the charts. But towards the end, it just started to get a bit of a slump and they were interested in something new. Well, the crazy thing about this is that NJO, all 19 of those novels that you see there made the New York Times bestseller list. All 19, 19 in a row, which is crazy. And if you look, one of the reasons I went through the listing by listening to actually find where they were on the chart. One of the reasons I did that is because if you look at the books that are around the NJO, that really puts it into perspective how well they were doing. I mean, they come into the list sometimes at like maybe #7 or #10 or 13, and they're right next to like a Stephen King, or a Dan Brown, like I said, Stephen King. You're going up against the Dark Tower series. Of course, Harry Potter's hanging in there. You've got the Da Vinci Code novels. You've got so many heavy hitters. And NJO, they're not hanging in there as long because the releases are frequent. But it's about 1 to 2 weeks per novel, sometimes almost really 3. I mean, I think Vector Prime was 4. And then, they're doing that, but they're hanging right in there. And even when they're off the list, they're down at like 16, 17. They're still hanging around. These novels sold so well that it surprised Lucasfilm. They did better than the Clone Wars multimedia project, which was a huge surprise. They did better than the prequel novels. It was a very big surprise to everyone working. And that's one of the reasons Nightfall trilogy got cut, was to try to create opportunities for the prequel novels to take off, have a life of their own. So I believe that in exchange for Nightfall, we got like Darth Maul Shadowhunter, and we got, I think Cloak of Deception might have been another one. So, I mean, you have those prequel novels that kind of get exchanged, but yeah, it's crazy. I mean, the USA Today and the New York Times, they're covering the release of these books because they're a phenomenon. They were successful for 4 straight years, longest in Lucasfilm history. I've never heard of a series doing this well for this long. And then even the unifying force at the end, you get these, sometimes you get newspaper reviews of that novel. It's kind of crazy to think about. I mean, and the funny thing is I actually went through, and if you look, the series actually slightly improved in its competition as it went. I mean, the last half of it's actually really competing pretty well. The last thing I'll say about all that is that, with these novels coming out, of course, they had 5 hardbacks. They expected them to be successful, but the rest of the paperbacks, they really had no idea. And that's the crazy thing. All of them were New York Times bestsellers. And I mean, we're talking like 250,000 first print run, 200,000. That's a lot for a first run, all getting sold.
Yeah, it's incredible. I mean, I was going to put up, because you do have them all circled, and I was looking and it's like, man, you're right. The Harry Potter's on the list. Even like, I had no idea these things, like you said, all 19 made it.
Yeah. I think, by the time of 2005, I wish they gave current numbers. I'd love to read that. But today, if today was 2005, so just a year or two after the novels were finished releasing, in 2005, the series had sold 4 million copies, which is about 200,000-300,000 per copy. And so now, fast forward like 20 years, I can't imagine how many books these have sold.
Oh, we can only guess at this point, right? Maybe.
Right.
It's
crazy the reach, right? Because these books, they're not just going to individuals. They go to families, which means you've got friends, you've got siblings, you've got sons and daughters reading this stuff. And the reach of this is huge. I think people underestimate just how popular this was, which does kind of tie into the Chewbacca newspaper thing.
That's where I was going to go. I was going to bring that up. But that's what makes me want to jump forward and read these, just because of how everybody I've never heard one bad thing about them. It's just all incredible. Just an amazing read. So
it's funny, at the time, and we'll see this with the newspaper coverage, is that, there was some controversy. You can see it here. This was a fun little project, right? So
I grabbed a few of them to show, because some of the headlines were just like, and these were in actual newspapers. Which is crazy.
All across the United States, and I think actually some of these were, going all over the world. It was funny, so I mean, spoiler, I suppose, but everybody knows. I mean, at the beginning of Invector Prime, Chewbacca is killed, and George signed off on it and everything. But that was something that caught newspaper after newspaper, major newspapers covering this. Local newspapers, huge, USA Today, big newspapers, they're all covering this. Washington Post, and just from everywhere. You go to Honolulu and New York, and like I said, outside the United States, they're covering all this. The funny thing is, some of them even put Chewbacca's article pretty much next to the obituary section.
Yeah. Godspeed. Look at that headline there. It's crazy. When I was coming across this, it's like, wow. And people really took to this. There wasn't, like you said, a great reaction when what happened to Chewbacca took place.
It was a mixture. There was a lot of sadness, and there was a lot of some people thought it was great, some people hated it, and then you had some people who were kind of in denial. I know R.A. Salvatore would give this story where he'd get letters, people saying, "Oh, they never found the body." So I mean, he's out there. But you see this, and it's amazing, because firstly, an EU novel being in newspapers, like front page, or it's crazy. Vector Prime being, but then if you go in and you read some of this, it's funny. They've got they're talking about Anakin Solo, and they're talking about what happens. It's crazy.
I wanted to show something else here too when we're talking about NJO. I'll get this out of here for a second, but there was just like, even this here kind of blew my mind a little bit, and we'll pop this up here in 1 second. Oh, where'd it go now? I lost it. Well, anyway, I'll bring it up here in a second, folks. Technical difficulties, that's to be expected here on the TVB show. I don't have a crew working for me yet. They're on the way. They're coming though, so don't worry about that.
I'll mention while you're looking for that this is a part of Star Wars history, and it's easily forgotten.
There we go.
It is a legitimate part. Okay, I could mention something about these. So this is nuts. So I mean,
is that a good picture? Can you see it okay?
Yep.
Okay.
So I put this together. I just found some of these things. So I mean, yeah, there was merchandise for this series, not much, but there was. Hard to believe. Some of these things are very rare. If you find one, you're very lucky. So like that pin, I've only seen one ever. That hat, I've only seen one ever. I mean, they were putting out some of these pins, but the hat, I think they gave some of those away at some of the Del Rey events. I know at the book tour that James Luceno, James Luceno went on a book tour for this series, multiple cities, radio interviews, and the whole thing. And so they gave out some of those hats there, some action figures. You can see the action figures here. It's crazy. They put some of these out. And then, of course, you had these promos and posters, which there's more than people realize in terms of the promos they exist.
Yeah. It caught my attention because I like the little action figures, and that's like the perfect 3 3/4 is like my favorite. So it's like, man, that'd be cool to get my hands on them.
Yeah, they are hard to find. Some of them.
Yeah. So that whole series, okay. Why did they stop after that, right? Like the end of it all was Crucible, to my understanding, correct? Like that was the last novel that the expanded universe got.
So yes, if you go to like the NJO ended with the Unifying Force, and then about 20 years later in the timeline, they continued on with these other series. And you get to Crucible. Now we could, if you want, we could talk a little bit about that. It is kind of a delicate subject for some people, but the post New Jedi Order, and I could do it without spoilers so that you stay in the dark, but sure. It's it's a subject, and I'll be giving it more of my attention going forward, but it is a subject which it's one of those times where you have a difference in creative visions.
Okay.
And one vision wins out and the other vision loses out. And the vision, obviously the people that are not happy with the vision that wins out are going to look to the vision that loses out. And I have to confess to you that I'm of that group. But also trying to be a kind of a researcher and a reporter, I try to report on it as sort of objectively as I can.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, essentially what I could tell you about that is that, if you'd like to hear it, is that, when Del Rey planned out NJO with George and then with James Luceno and Michael Stackpole and Lucy Wilson, who we talked about last time.
Yep.
There was a plan to go and do NJO, and that was sort of it. I mean, that was the vision, and there was an idea that was as far as they were going to go. So they're planning out that series in '98, and they work on each novel, and they pump them out at a relentless pace. And then you get to 2003. And there is still, even at that point, so we're talking the beginning of 2003, there is still no vision for anything after the Unifying Force. They made no plans. There's nothing. So I think the vision for Lucasfilm at that time was that that's our conclusion. The conclusion that we're writing for the Star Wars saga, sort of, is the Unifying Force. And James Luceno, he's talked about this in interviews, that he wrote the Unifying Force with that intention in mind.
Okay.
He kind of wrote it as a wrap-up. And if you read that novel, everyone kind of knows that is how it reads. That's how it feels, like a wrap-up of Star Wars. And it's a very good one. It's an excellent one. Well, what ends up happening is about halfway through 2003, a trilogy it's decided that the series is so successful. Do we really want to call it quits here? I mean, people love these characters, so do we really want to end it? And the idea there is no, let's keep it going. And so the decision is made. This is while Lucy Wilson is kind of ending her time at Lucasfilm, not Lucasfilm, but at Lucasfilm Publishing. She moves over to the nonfiction. So as she's kind of finishing up, there's a decision. I don't know who made the decision, but they made a decision at that point to greenlight a trilogy written by Troy Denning, who wrote Star by Star and Tatooine Ghost, to write this Dark Nest trilogy. And so Troy asked, he said, what do you want me to write about? And they said, whatever you want. We don't have any ideas for what's after NJO, so you could do what you want. And that meant that he did come up with his idea, which had a lot of insects and all sorts of things.
Yeah, I heard controversial things about that series. I forgot that was in between there. Yeah.
Yeah, and so he writes that, and then what essentially happens is, they say, well, we'd like more Jedi characters, we'd like more film characters in this. And so he says, okay, and then they publish that. And, just to show how long these novels take to get done, I mean, they greenlight that in halfway through 2003. And then, those books come out in 2005, like towards the end of 2005. So, I mean, there's a time period here. And at that same time, so he does that trilogy. He does it alone. He's not talking with James Luceno. Luceno kind of led the NJO vision. He's not talking with him. He's not really talking with other people. I mean, the Unifying Force isn't even published when he starts Dark Nest. So essentially, the things are going forward. And then in 2004, you have late 2003, early 2004, you have Lucasfilm was thinking, okay, we want to do another series after NJO. Look at how successful NJO has been. They didn't know it at the time, but Dark Nest didn't do that great in terms of sales. It didn't make the New York Times bestseller list. You have 19 in a row, and then you got 3 that none of them. Yeah. And so it's kind of a surprise, but they started to think, well, we want to do another trilogy, or not a trilogy, but a trilogy of trilogies. We want to do 9. But initially, the idea was we're going to do the Old Republic. It's going to be set in the Old Republic. We want to do a story that's kind of more inspired by Revenge of the Sith, where we want to go into the dark side. Characters go into the dark. We want to make that, in the words of Aaron Alston, we want to stretch that out. We want to get into it, And so get that darker edge. And so I guess if NJO, if NJO is not enough for you want more dark, they were thinking we want to go dark. And so we want to take characters, we want to really take them to the dark. And we want to show that. But the problem is they're looking around for ideas and they just can't. They're just struggling to come up with something that's compelling for that era, the Old Republic. And right around that time, Sue Rustany, who is the editor at Lucasfilm now, I mean, Lucy Wilson's gone, so she's kind of leading that effort. You have a situation where she just sends out this message to Troy Denning. Hey, Troy, do you have any ideas for our series? We're looking for anything. And that's where Denning, I think the stars align for him, because he thinks, well, I'm doing this Dark Nest thing and I'm taking this character, Jacen, and I'm going in these directions. And then they bring this to him and he goes, well, what if we do this thing? What if I take this character or that character and we go real dark with it? And that decision, is sort of exactly what they were looking to hear. And so then they go forward. Legacy of the Force, they plan that out in 2004. They don't ask George at that point. George is busy. He's not doing this anymore. But they go and they do Legacy of the Force. And they did invite James Luceno to sort of get in on the meeting, but he just describes it as being a lot of different visions. I don't know how much input he had there. And then they go forward, and then as they make Fate of the Jedi. It's another situation. And then they do Crucible. But the ultimate issue with this really is some of the authors, James Luceno, Elaine Cunningham, Walter John Williams, Matthew Stover, some of the authors who wrote for the New Jedi Order, Michael Stackpole, these guys, they had a vision for, even though the series was kind of going to conclude at the Unifying Force, they did have an idea of what's after. And they didn't envision what they did do. And some of these things are very kind of controversial with the fandom, because it's a very hard right turn where Legacy of the Force, Troy Denning had his own interpretation of the events of the NJO, which was not the intention of the authors who wrote it. So you end up with certain characters, I won't say who, but if you read it, that certain characters are portrayed in ways that some of the authors said later on, this is not really what we had in mind.
Yeah, they kind of did the opposite from what I understand. But then book series are pretty popular though, correct? Like Legacy and
They were.
Fate.
They sold well. Legacy of the Force, Fate of the Jedi. They weren't as successful as NJO, but they did make it to the New York Times bestseller list more often than not. I think they only missed one book each, and they were successful novels. Even Crucible made the bestseller list. So I mean, these are successful novels. Financially, they have a fandom, and they, like I said, they have lots of fans. But it's just a different take on it, and
Okay.
I will say that I am writing something that I don't have it ready now, but I've been getting something together of sort of just to show those fans that are interested comments from the authors of maybe the vision that they had in mind. Let's say that you're a person that didn't care for Legacy of the Force or Fate of the Jedi. What, that other vision that we didn't go down. Well, I've been getting those comments together. It's an interesting vision. It's a bit more like Bantam, to be honest with you. But yeah.
Oh, that's cool. That'll be interesting to see. Yeah, I was curious because I just recently started watching the sequel trilogy again, and I was just in my head. I was thinking I'm on The Last Jedi now, and I was enjoying them. My conversation with Mr. Beidler, kind of his thoughts on the sequel trilogy, kind of inspired me in a different way to look at it.
Sure.
I'll say that. So I was just wondering, like, I'm sure this question has probably been proposed to others, but like, what would have been the proper way for Luke to go? Does that make sense? Yeah.
That's a good question. I mean,
Yeah.
obviously, that's something that George said no to the authors when they came up with it. That was the first idea, by the way. Instead of Chewie, he said, "Well, what if we kill Luke?" And George goes, "Yeah, right." So that's not going to happen. But there is some discussion that's been said. I think Mark and George have talked about this. That Luke, if he was going to die in his sequel trilogy, it would have been in the last film. So I'm sure there's ways to do it. I think, in terms of my own personal opinion, I don't have as much issue with killing characters.
Right.
As long as the characters went out the way that, as long as they live in a way that I feel is faithful to that rendering. So
I hear you.
Yeah, so I never have had as much issue with killing characters as long as the character is acting in ways that I think it makes sense for the character acting. If they don't act in ways that make sense, that's where I sort of am more critical. And to be honest with you, the number one priority for a writer is to make, or to have the reader believe what is happening. And if I get used to reading a character a certain way or seeing a certain character, and if they act, to me, wildly out of character,
Yeah.
then I just then at that point it's almost involuntary. I just don't believe what I'm seeing anymore. I just don't believe it.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't mean to. I'm glad you. Thank you for sharing your personal thought. I want to ask that to folks to get their opinion, because I was just wondering, because we actually see in the Dark Empire, we see some of the what they had, pieces they took, the Force projection.
Yes.
Which is incredible now that I've read the Dark Empire and I understand. And it's like, wow, that is really cool that they use that.
Yeah. It is a thing where, something like The Last Jedi, it's its own, it's a artist take on what if we take this trajectory. I mean, a couple authors, really. You got JJ and Lawrence Kasdan and people like that, and then Ryan saying, what if, and Filoni, people don't know that he was involved in that, but he was, that you say, what if we go here on the map? Now, is that what I would have done? No, but I can sort of understand, authors or different artists saying, well, wouldn't it be interesting if we go over here? Interesting doesn't always mean you're going to make everybody happy. I mean, NJO sometimes didn't make people happy. It made me happy, but not everybody.
Yeah, well, I mean, I've heard that, but it's people still have a good perspective of the books, or how they want to, tell. They still enjoyed them, from what I understand, even if there was moments that upset them or what have you.
Yeah. And as you were saying, you asked the question, how would Luke go? I mean, if it's me envisioning, if I'm writing a scene where Luke has to die, which I'd be shaking in my boots if I had to. But if I was writing that scene, of course, I probably would. I honestly would probably want it to be a non-violent way to go, but if it is a violent way, then he's saving people. I'd
Oh
have
yeah.
him there saving people. Now, one quibble with me with The Last Jedi is that I probably wouldn't have him die through projection. I would have him literally there,
Yeah.
giving his life. But that's different visions. So
No, yeah, that's it was just it just kind of blew my mind a little bit just seeing that. I agree. I think the character, a good character, as long as he stays true to the path and follows what, and not do a 360 or 180 or just completely night and day. Eventually, all good characters have to go, right? The stories get like riding out on a horse in the blaze of glory. You know what I'm saying? Like, or
well, I will say one of the things I've always loved about Return of the Jedi, because we've seen it again soon, is it's so unique if you really think about movies you've seen, especially sci-fi, the way Yoda goes. I mean, how often do you see a film where a character who's very important dies peacefully, and
yeah,
it's a death which leaves Luke lonely, but he's also very grateful. I always loved Mark's acting in that scene.
yeah.
So yeah, I always thought that was so great that you actually have a peaceful death in Star Wars.
Yeah, very, very peaceful. It wasn't like that whole, like you said, that whole film is just, it's great from just the way it's shot, the music, the scenes of the beauty and the emotional connection that characters have, how things wrap up at the end, the Ewoks, you know.
And George has talked about how, I love the commentary George gives about that hallway thing with Luke and Vader in the hallway, where he says, it's sort of the heart of the movie, where he's going, Luke is there. He's there saying, this is not a battle that we're going to fight where I want to kill you. I'm not here to kill you. He wants to have basically a conversation. He's saying, listen, I'm not going to fight you. I'm not going to do this. We are going to work this out. It's like almost more of a mature type of story where you have a character saying, I'm not satisfied with where things are here. I mean, obviously he has reasons. The whole galaxy hangs in the balance. But on a personal level, it's him with his father saying, no, we're going to work this out. I'm not going anywhere. You're going to have to kill me. So we're going to have to work this out. And I find that so interesting. Also extremely brave of Luke.
Well, yeah. But I mean, if you think about it, like you said, that's a real life event that happens between a father and a son. But normally it's the father that's trying to, boy, settle down, we're going to figure this out. We're here. Talk to me about it. So it is great to see that.
Yeah, I've always felt that Luke has the wisdom and the compassion of his mother. And if you really think about what Padmé does at Revenge of the Sith, she's going to try the same thing that Luke tries. She's trying to talk Anakin out of it, and she unfortunately it doesn't work.
No, she's a very strong woman, and she's very compassionate. And you get
I can't stand it when people say that, oh, her character's goes down the tubes. I mean, if you look, what she does at the end of Revenge of the Sith is incredibly brave. She doesn't go with any weapons. She knows what he can do. She thinks that maybe she can talk about it. If we say it's brave for Luke, we have to say it's brave for Padmé.
Yes, she's brilliant, and her character is great. And even in the books, how their connection is built, then you see that. Well, if you read them, you understand, and you get a better depth of it.
Yeah, one of the stories I've always wanted, and they never did it. Black Fleet Crisis came close, but it was before the prequels. Is I would have loved a story where Luke is going to Naboo, and I've always kind of dreamed of this idea. Maybe there's some deleted scenes from Attack of the Clones where R2 runs into as like playing with some of Padmé's like nieces and nephews, and I was like, wouldn't it be neat if Luke goes to Naboo and you get a little story where maybe one of these Amidala family recognizes R2, and that sparks the conversation, and Luke goes, whoa.
That would be cool.
Which Jedi was here? Who was that? My mother.
Who?
Yeah.
I want to give a quick shout out here. I forgot to do this earlier, but SkoomaJoe for letting me be a part, inviting me to the Discord that you guys have. It's great. You guys, I mean, I'm not in there a lot, but it's like you guys have some fun and I see some good conversations going on in there from time to time when I peek. So I want to give a shout out to him saying thanks. appreciate it. But it's just it's crazy the topics you guys have in there is, and it's good stuff. So
yeah, it's a great server.
Yeah, for sure. I wanted to talk to you because the last time we mentioned, well, you mentioned, but George and his ideas and thoughts he had behind the television series and such, and wanted to do Knights of the Old Republic as you uncovered the underground footage and you put that together and got that up for us to put our eyes on. But you mentioned the new Sith Wars, and that really stuck out to me. That he had this idea of some sort of show that he wanted to do about that. And I just wanted to kind of pick your brain a little bit more about that.
Well, you've asked one of the more tantalizing questions. So that's, you can't see me, but I got a smile on my face because this is one of those things that I discovered really pretty recently in the last year or so, that when I started to find out about it, it was like a clue here and a clue there. And, George, I think Dave Dorman said this once, he did the covers for Dark Empire, and he said once, George has a vision of what he wants out of Star Wars. He knows what happens in the universe, but he doesn't tell us. He just gives us clues and little guideposts. So you can't do this. No, it's more like this. But he never tells us the whole story. And so he keeps those cards close to his chest. But in the new Sith Wars, he did slip out some ideas he had, and I find them so fascinating. So I will tell you what I found. Basically, and maybe George would have been interested in going back and doing a show about this. I don't know. But he had a whole backstory in mind for the Sith. It's a very interesting one. I mean, of course, he talked with... he had an idea of what the Sith were going back to the 80s and the 70s. But in fact, there's some deleted footage from A New Hope where the word Sith is mentioned. But you have a situation in the early 90s where he's talking with Tom Veach and Kevin Anderson. He's giving him tips. And Kevin Anderson tells this kind of funny story where George is saying to him, well, you have to remember there's only one master and one apprentice. And Kevin's going, why? George won't say, but he's already got an idea at that time of the rule of two. But anyway, we get to the Phantom Menace, and he's talking with interviewers. He talks with Terry Brooks, who wrote that novel, Phantom Menace. And then he, which initially, by the way, George wanted that novel to all be from Anakin's point of view, but eventually they kind of changed it. But yeah, he's talking with Terry Brooks, and he gives him that little piece of information about Bane, Darth Bane, and the establishment of the rule of two, which is 1,000 years prior to the films. Now, here's where this gets interesting. So in some interviews, usually around the prequel era, but especially in the 2019 interview he did for the Star Wars Prequel Archives book, he talks at length about his vision of that era. And I won't say it exactly the way he said it, but I'll try to summarize the picture that he builds.
Sure.
Essentially, and there are very minute, there are some references to this in the EU in little guides and stuff, but hardly any actual content. I mean, Knight Errant is a novel that comes way at the end, but which I haven't read. I'd like to, but I know it dabbles with some of this. Yeah, I got to check it out. But the vision that George had in his mind was that 2,000 years before the films, Jedi are trucking along, Republic's trucking along, galaxy's fine. And what happens is there is this Jedi. The EU called him Darth Ruin. I don't think George ever gave him a name, but unless he gave them the name. But there is this Jedi who breaks away from the Jedi. He follows his own path and ends up becoming a Sith, or Dark Lord of the Sith, and leading the Sith, leading a kind of a heretical group of Jedi and forming a bunch of Sith. And that group grows. And the way George tells it, over hundreds of years, these Sith groups grow and grow and grow until they way outnumber the Jedi. I mean, the Sith, in George's vision, and this is one of the most mind-blowing, cool things, And I'll tell you, I actually found evidence of this in the movies, which blew my mind a second time, which is that in George's vision, the Sith took over the galaxy. They took over the Republic in that 1,000-year time span. Somewhere in there, for some stretch of hundreds of years, the Sith grew to such a number. Of course, George with numbers, he tends to be pretty loose with numbers, but he says, they have thousands and thousands. I don't know if it's hundreds of thousands, but they have a lot of Sith. And they're running, they run the Republic. They rule the galaxy. They rule the Republic. But what happens in George's vision, and people have brought this up, you see, George had this little comment where he said, well, the Jedi and Sith, they never had a war. People say they had a war. They never had a war. Well, what George means, and he's clarified it in these comments, which is the Jedi are way outnumbered at this point. They don't run things anymore, and they are sort of on the run. And the Sith are in huge number, and they run everything. And so it's not a Jedi Sith war, it's a Sith on Sith war. What ends up happening is kind of like a Roman Republic, like ancient thing where you have, it's like popes killing each other, where you got like this, you've got the Sith trying to assassinate other Sith. Everyone's trying to vie for power. You have these factions and these groups. You have Sith like fiefdoms and kingdoms. Everybody's trying to kill everybody else. And it's just a really bad time for the galaxy. And like I said, the Jedi are just trying to survive, try to keep things together in their own little world. And as time goes on, in George's vision, the Sith numbers start to go down because they are really taking each other out. I mean, they're trying to be the top. Everyone wants to be the top dog. And that's why, by the way, George rejected the NJO outline, where I should tell you this, the original NJO outline was very similar to Legacy of the Force and Fate of the Jedi, what they did do.
Okay.
And that was the outline that George said, no way, Jose, because one of the reasons is he didn't like the idea of the Sith as having a society that could like continue. He's like, there's no way. And the reason why is because he thought a Sith society would ultimately destroy itself in pretty quick order. And that's the way he saw this happening, is that back in the new Sith Wars time, the Sith, they're taking each other out. It's so unstable. The galaxy is sort of in chaos. And as we get closer to 1000 BBY, the Jedi start to hold their own. And as George says, they start to try to mop up the mess a little bit. So they're throwing their hat into the ring. They're trying to clean up some of this Sith stuff. And then eventually you have Darth Bane enter the scene, and he comes up with this idea, well, what if I'm in charge and we just do this rule of two things? So he has his part to play in the end of the Sith. And eventually you get to 1000, where finally the Jedi are restored as the leaders of the Republic. And then you go forward from there. And of course, the Sith go underground. The Jedi know they're around, but they're underground. And then after that, you have all these prophecies that come up, Chosen One and all this. But, this is the vision of a crazy period of time in galactic history. It sounds interesting, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's kind of blowing my mind sitting here thinking about it, my friend.
Right.
You're throwing a lot of stuff at us here today. Appreciate that. But it's like, wow, I'm just trying to envision that taking place and everything flowing together. Like you just said, it starts from the beginning and then all the way to the hero's journey to just seeing all that unfold would have been incredible.
Yeah. And you think, how does a person tell a story like that that takes place over hundreds or thousands of years? But yeah, you've got this vision. Now, here's the interesting thing. When you look at the film, so I read these interviews, very interesting. George talking about this cool concept. And then I started to notice things where you go, oh, wait, that is a line from the script. Oh, that's a line from the film. And then you go, wow, this is there. This is in the prequels. So it is in the prequels. So, I mean, you have right away Darth Maul saying, at last we will have reveal ourselves to the Jedi. We're going to have our revenge. Revenge,
yeah, you're right.
And then you get to the Revenge of the Sith, and Palpatine's going, once more, the Sith will rule the galaxy. Once more. And then in the script, you have Mace Windu saying, the Sith will never return. Your plan to regain, he says in the script, regain control of the Republic has failed. And wow. You're not going to control the Republic again. And so this is an ancient Jedi Sith feud. And then even in Attack of the Clones and Phantom Menace, you have some political things where they'll say, I know the EU has its own explanation, but you have some moments where the characters will say, you know, it's been over 1,000 years since there's been a full-scale civil war. There's, you know, this republic has stood for 1,000 years, and we are not letting that. And so you think 1,000 years, and then with this whole story, I can't help but think, I'm thinking a massive reorganization of the galaxy happened at the end of this.
It's speechless again.
Right.
That's why I like to have you on to talk to you, because we'll have a revenge of the Sith line. It just like he was putting will regain Mace Windu, the whole thing. I don't know how this. Could you just imagine what this would have been like? I mean, obviously, you read the stuff, you're digging into this, but do you see what I'm saying here? You follow?
Oh yeah, it's crazy to imagine. And like I said, Knight Errant dabbles a bit. They started to tiptoe their way into that. I don't know if they asked George or what, but they started to tiptoe their way into this kind of idea of Jedi on the run. Sith are out there. It's a dangerous place. The galaxy is sort of run by those guys. And like I said, the EU does kind of have its sort of version. Darth Ruin, this guy who, you know, but I don't know if they got that from these same interviews or if they did their own thing. I don't know. But I would have loved to see more content about this mysterious thing. And like you said, I mean, imagining this in any way, but especially on screen. I mean, Matthew Stover says that when he was doing Revenge of the Sith, he had a chat with George for about 3-4 hours. And that George just went on about everything. And he talked about how George, there were things revealed in that conversation that have never been in print anywhere. Not in EU, not in interviews, nothing. And that tantalizing piece of information, the fact that, and he said, you know, George has all these ideas about the Jedi and the Sith. And the fact that conversation was 4 hours long, which, by the way, if any intrepid researchers are out there, I know that was a conversation that was recorded and transcribed. Just Stover has. But that's a conversation where I have to imagine this is touched on. I mean, Matt's writing the book. So I have to think that they talk about this. And I'd of course, love to know more about that. But.
Yeah, I heard that's a fantastic novel. I've not read that yet. Well, I mean, he's a great author as well. I mean, he's one of your favorites, if I'm not mistaken, right? Traitor, is that?
Yeah, he is my favorite. And actually, I read Traitor, and he was instantly my favorite just from that one book. Just, you know, you sort of go to the top of the mountain, in my own opinion. You see, like, whoa. When I read Traitor, I thought, I didn't know that Star Wars could even do this. I mean,
wow.
I'll put it this way: I love Star Wars and I love the novels, but there were times reading that book that I felt like it was almost a bit of a, I don't mean this in a mean way, but it's almost a bit of disservice to Traitor to have the Star Wars label on it, because I felt like this could be put in the literature section.
Really?
Oh yeah, you know, it's dealing with the same stuff that you would read in philosophy or some.
Oh, so it gets deep like that, hey?
It takes it on. I mean, it takes Star Wars on and grabs it by the horns.
Interesting.
And the way it's written, the prose is incredible. I mean, he's a very gifted writer.
Yes, I really love Shatterpoint. I think that's a fantastic novel. I love it. Actually, that's the book I was going to read next, since I don't have the Republic Commando stuff. But I'm kind of reading comics right now, taking a break, reading The Dawn of the Jedi. So. Yeah,
you know. So yeah, that's kind of the vision of the new Sith Wars. It's very tantalizing. But now that we mentioned Traitor, I have a thought. I don't know if you want to go in this direction, but you had been interested last time in the mythology, and some of the inspirations, behind some of these things. And you know, I have to tell you, I think reading Traitor certainly got me put on a philosophical track. And what you find, and I got a question about this week from someone, is that there are a lot of philosophical influences, mythological influences that come into Star Wars, and they don't just stop with the films. Of course, George was dealing with that, but the great thing about something like the New Jedi Order is you have authors like James Luceno Matthew Stover. You have people like Greg Keyes, Walter John Williams. These are very worldly people. They're reading literature. They've, in the case of James Luceno, he's been all over the world, and most of these guys have practiced martial arts. I mean,
yeah.
So that, there's a lot of stuff coming in there.
Oh yeah. I mean, even I like it when they touch on the forms. Like a lot of folks don't understand, or people, the different forms of combat. I like that martial arts influence that they give, in the books. Like Steve Perry, he's into all that stuff as well.
Yes. And Stover's talked about the influence, especially on Vergere and the philosophy and Traitor from like Taoism and from Zen. And if you don't mind, there's a couple of quotes that are very reminiscent. I can mention to you some of them if for
Absolutely.
any people interesting who want more. If you want more of like Vergere and you can't find it in the novels, then so I mean, you have real people. I mean, real people that existed. Shuang Tzu, he was a sort of a Taoist master, and here's a quote from him. The torch of doubt and chaos. This is what the sage steers by. I mean, that's a Vergere quote. If there's any quote like this, 100% Vergere. And then you have a Zen master. This guy who really does remind me of Vergere a lot. He was a Zen master in China, medieval China. His name was Lin Chi. And he has this very famous quote that if you meet the teacher, if you meet the Buddha on the road, kill him. And of course, that's at the time him saying this would have shocked everyone. But that's very Vergere, which is like, if you want to engage with these ideas, step up to the plate, take me down. It's like the master kind of tempting you in and say, I want you to tell me I'm wrong.
That's great. And that's pretty right to the point. You find him, you kill him. That's it.
Right. And of course, he doesn't literally mean, kill the Buddha. So what does he mean? And that's it's that cave scene. It's that whole thing that if you see something out there, I think Linji has this quote where he says, students are looking for their own hands and their own feet. They're looking for their own head, but you've already got one. And it's like this idea that, it's inside you. What you're looking for is inside you. And that's part of that message in Traitor, which is Jacen has to find that. It's inside him. His answers are with him. He is the answer. He can be the answer. And he doesn't have to keep searching here or there and looking out of himself for that. And it's like I said, it's the cave scene. Luke, you go in there and you find who's in the Vader mask. It's yourself.
Look, it's powerful stuff and deep too. I love that, and I like how they say it in different ways to make you think rather than just, well, you got to find it inside you. Well, what does that mean? But they can tell you it in a different way, and then it really brings things into a different perspective, if that makes sense.
Yeah, you see, all these Jedi masters are always trying to teach their students. It's like in Zen or something where they're trying, which I have a little bit of contact with, where you have these masters that are gonna try to get across to you something that if they were to tell you it directly, you would probably believe the teacher, but that would eliminate the point, right? Because they want you to find it. They don't want you to just believe because I'm the teacher. You don't just listen to me. So really the point is to try to get you to have that breakthrough where you realize it and you don't need the teacher, but the teacher's kind of provoking you in some ways. He's kind of giving you, or in the case of Vergere, she's kind of giving what she can. There's a quote I think that inspired a lot of the philosophy of Traitor, which is from the Tao Te Ching, Lao Tzu, where it goes, the way that can be weighed is not the way, or the force that can be forced is not the way. And so I know that Matthew Stover said that line kind of inspired him for that novel. There's another line, Vergere is famous for saying everything I tell you is a lie. Jacen eventually goes, well, everything everybody says is a lie, right? Because the true reality is beyond description. And that is the essence of a lot of that philosophy, which is, I think Lao Tzu says, the 5 sounds make a person deaf. The 5 sights, the 5 colors make a person blind. Basically, the idea that if you're going by these abstract rubrics, you're missing, if you go by that, you're missing reality, because reality sort of is the whole rainbow. If you really want to see something, you have to see the whole rainbow, and you're not going to get it through a concept or just some words. You have to sort of see it directly for yourself. So I love that NJO sort of has the guts to sort of go there.
Go there. Yeah, that's incredible. See, that's another reason I didn't know it was that influenced heavy.
Yeah, I mean, of course, all this starts with George. I mean, one of my favorite lines is in The Phantom Menace, where he says, Qui-Gon says, your focus determines your reality. And if you look, that's just a restatement of many philosophical things that have been said, but especially there's a collection of the quotes of the Buddha, which is called the Dhammapada. It's a good read. And in the first line is, we are what we think. What we think creates our world. Your focus determines your reality. This essentially, it's a restatement.
Yeah, man, that's cool. Have you studied philosophy?
Yeah, I have, and it's really cool when you see this stuff. In fact, I'll tell you something funny. I don't know if this is the way it works for a lot of people, but I read NJO when I was in high school and a little bit in junior high, and so when I got to college and I was starting to take classes where we're going into philosophy, there would be times where I would go, "Oh, that was Traitor," or "Oh, that was In Destiny's Way," or I'd go, "Oh, I remember this debate in Force Heretic," or something. I mean, it's so funny to think that's, I remember reading Friedrich Nietzsche for the first time, and reading some of his takes on suffering, how he saw there was a value in suffering and we all need it to grow. And I'm just going, man, this is the first couple chapters of Traitor right here. This is great. So I mean, and definitely when you read like these Zen masters of these kind of inscrutable sayings, these Zen koans, these riddles, oh yeah, it just takes me back to Yoda and Vergere. So I got to say, the path has been paved by Star Wars, and there's not a lot of media in the Western world that does that. Star Wars is kind of it, to take you in not just normal like traditional philosophy, but out in these other directions to China and Japan.
Well, you mentioned this before, and George always told to be bold, right? Like that was kind of like the behind NJO and him getting involved and through the Dark Empire, like the whole process. Be bold.
Be bold, and don't be afraid to pull from everything, from history, from everywhere. And I think it's so great, not just NJO guys. I mean, a lot of other guys too, but a lot of people writing from the EU, they're pulling things in, just like George did, from history, from anthropology, from mythology. We're taking this story and we're doing this with it.
And I think that's why they age so well, and they'll stand the test of time.
Yeah, they're myths. They're modern myths. And what's modern about them is that they're happening now. But what's not modern about them is that we're all human, and we're essentially the same as we were 200,000 years ago. So
yeah, just with different things, I guess we'll say.
Yeah, we got the same set, we got different set decoration, but people still care about their friends and their family. They still question what's right and wrong. They still don't know what to do sometimes, and they have to find a path anyway. Yeah. That's what like I mentioned in the last time we talked, I think it's one of my favorite parts of Luke's journey, right? And Jacen takes the same path, which is you take that step forward and you might not know where it leads.
Yeah.
But that is the essence of being a mature person. And it was something, not to lean too heavily on him, I disagree in some respects, but there's some of that in some of this philosophical stuff. I think Nietzsche would talk about that people live their whole lives with sort of like a commandments held over them by society that they have to follow. But if you're really going to mature, at some point you have to decide, what's my direction? What are my rules that I'm going to live by, if I'm going to live by any? And that's where, Luke, we see this in a lot of media. It's a mythological theme that you have people like, there's a reason that in the last Harry Potter novel, Harry Potter has these revelations that Dumbledore was really not so perfect after all. There's a reason, because he was his mentor, and becoming an adult means you realize that your parents, your mentors, are not perfect. They're actually people just like you. And that's part of the maturing process. And that's what Luke goes through in Return of the Jedi. It's like, no, I'm not going to kill my father. You're way off, Ben. I'm not going to do that. And, like Yoda's dead and Ben is not going to be able to help, and he's wrong anyway. And so you have you have that process where Luke's got to go through that. And then, Jacen kind of is going through a similar process where he's realizing, Vergere is bringing this stuff that's way out of left field on the Vong. And then, not necessarily dethroning Luke, but he does have his disagreements with Luke. I mean, really the whole series long, where it's just kind of like, I don't know. I have to find my own path. I'm not sure that this is what's right for me, or if this is the right way that a Jedi has to be. And so I think it's part of the process of any well-written story that a hero has to see the faults or the flaws of the old generation to correct them, which certainly Luke does with the prequels in the EU. He sees the faults of the old Jedi and he moves past them. When it comes to like the sequel films and canon, you have, I suppose a person could try to see it this way with Rey and with Luke in Last Jedi. I don't know if I do, but you could take that track. But I think it is a different interpretation because Luke sort of, he sees the faults of the prequel Jedi, but he feels that that's enough reason to maybe throw in the towel for a while. But he comes around at the end, I guess, in his own way. But I really like the EU telling of this, where you see Luke sort of builds upon his understanding, and then you see Jacen builds upon that.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not familiar much with Jacen. I was going to bring this up here and talk about this, so I'll just throw this up here now. But this is another, series that Luke or George was going to wanted to do, like a TV show. And this is with the Jacen and Jaina and them, if I'm not misunderstood.
You're right. Yeah, this is, this would have been something.
Yeah.
It would have been something. It was one of those just amazing things you come across that you don't think you'll ever find. And yeah, you're right that the only thing that you might have misstated there, and I wish it was true. I wish what you said was true, but the only person who maybe didn't want to do this was George. Okay. So I don't know if George actually cared about this, but it was something that Fox wanted to do it. The authors wanted to do it.
Yeah.
And then they went to Lucasfilm. I don't know if Lucasfilm was Luke Kiss. Maybe it was. But went to Lucasfilm, and Lucasfilm's like, we're busy right now. We have the prequels. We have the sequel. Or, excuse me. We have the prequels. We have the special editions. We're busy, and we just are not sure about doing this. But it's such a tantalizing idea that you have a network. Usually this works the other way around. You pitch to the network, but no, this is a case where Fox goes, hey, we are the big dog and we're asking you, the little dog, would you let us, do these stories? It would have been really cool, I think.
Yeah, that's right. It was my misunderstanding that Fox came to I thought George, this was on my list of things trying to remember, because maybe it was a Padawan show or something along those lines that George kind of wanted to. It blew my mind that he was already ahead of the game, basically, is what it comes down to. He was already seeing into the future.
Yeah, you're right. He did. Yeah. And he wanted to do a Padawan show. That's right. A spinoff of Clone Wars, which would have had a Wookiee Jedi, just like Young Jedi Knights did.
Yeah. I was going to say he wanted to build the Grady studio next to the ranch, but they didn't want the other folks around the area didn't want that to happen. Do you think had that would have happened, he still would be in the game today? Making.
That's a great question.
Because I was thinking about that myself, and I'm like, next to the ranch, you see all this beautiful, land. It would be perfect. I think he still would be. Maybe not as in depth into it, but he still would be the main, main factor.
I think, if I was to put a bet on it, I probably would say yes. I think he would still, because that would mean that his hopes were fulfilled, that they would do their TV show and it would work. They were still ahead, so they'd have to wait until streaming caught up. But they could do what they wanted to do. I think the one wild card is that George was getting married and that he was having a kid. And it's really hard to predict with that, because George has always been a family guy first. And the only time he wasn't I don't want to speak for him and say he regretted it, but if you read any of his interviews during the release of Return of the Jedi, he's not a happy camper. He's got a divorce, and he sort of got sucked into the production of those movies, and it was a really tragic thing at the time for him, because he had done all this to get this far, to make the films. We finished the trilogy. We do all this. He put everything on the back burner. He built the ranch, and then he comes home and his life is in shambles.
A mess. Yeah.
And that's really the reason that he did it, not to draw too many parallels with like Revenge of the Sith, but there may be some of Lucas's person in that
inside.
Yeah, which is, I did all this for us, and now there's nothing.
Yeah. That's always that's a real thing in life, though. We all want to, like, if you have a family, okay, you have kids, you want to give them better than what you had. That's kind of like the chosen path, we'll say. We'll go.
Yeah.
Right. So you put all this hard work in, but also you're missing out on your son's baseball game, or you're not being there for your wife. It's hard. It's a hard thing to do in life.
That's essentially it. I mean, it's like, and I think that, I can't say for sure, I'd never met him, but from what I understand, that was what was sort of in his head, which was, I'm doing all this for us. After the films are done, we can do whatever we want, but I just need to finish this first. And the problem is, it does remind me a little bit of some of the themes of the prequels. George has talked about this, which is selfishness and selflessness and letting go, and being able to see the wider picture and say, well, maybe I should let go. But in the case, he's admitted this is one of the reasons that he split with Disney, was he said, I care too much about these movies to stand on the sidelines. I can't do it. So I either have to totally break up with this, or I'm going to be there. So I think he knew himself, and he just knew that I can't watch this. Like, I know some of us have thought, couldn't he give notes? Well, firstly, Disney didn't want to hear it, but if they did, he initially thought that would work out for him, that he could give notes and they could help them. But I think as time went on, he realized, well, what happens when I give them a note and they don't want to do it?
I know. And then how am I going to feel?
And that's the thing, is George being George, he's not going to take this as an answer. I mean, it reminds me of an old conversation he had with a filmmaker friend of his. When George first made THX 1138, good movie, very different from Star Wars.
Yes.
When he first made that movie, he really went to bat to do what he wanted to do. He was lucky. He got a movie, which in the history of Hollywood, I don't know if there's been that many movies like this, where he got funded to do this thing. Francis Ford Coppola was protecting him, and he could just make whatever he wanted. And there's funny moments in the DVD commentary where George will go, if the studio had seen dailies on this, they would have fired me immediately. I'd been kicked off the set right away. And so, I mean, he's just doing what he wants. And of course, Warner Brothers was horrified by the final result, which, by the way, if you want your mind blown, that him doing THX just the way he wanted it, and then Warner Brothers being so offended by the final result, cutting out some of the part of the movie, which horrified George. In fact, George tells this crazy story of having a friend, they screen the movie, and then his friend is there with the van, and then the second the movie's over, they take the negatives and the film stock and move it to the van and run away with it, because he was afraid that Warner Brothers would destroy it so he would never be able to restore the movie. But anyway, after that, Warner Brothers was so pissed off about this that they said to Francis Ford Coppola, we loaned you money for this, and we had a deal, and you did not hold up your end of the deal, so we want that money back. And that's like, they wanted like $1 million back, essentially, some huge amount of money. And so Francis Ford Coppola very reluctantly goes, well, all right, I'll do something to get out of this jam I'm in. And the project that he chooses is The Godfather. And so that's how The Godfather gets made, is because George put Francis in a terrible position with THX. But me bringing this up, I really brought it up because it ties in with his relation to Disney, which is that one of George's filmmaker friends back then asked George one time, where do you get the confidence to just tell a movie studio producer, like, you're a new filmmaker, where do you get the confidence to tell a movie studio mogul like these studio heads, where do you get the gall to just, and the confidence to just tell them to screw off? And George apparently just looked at him and goes, I made it and they didn't. I'm the artist and they're not. I mean, wow.
Right in your face.
Right in your face. And I think that part of George never changed. And I think that's exactly what happened when they showed him Force Awakens. And he said to Iger, this is not what I want. I don't like this. And, you did a retread. And Iger goes, well, that's what we were trying to do. You don't understand the pressures we were under. And George is just like, I'm out of here.
Yeah. I don't blame him. I get, why have your name tied on something that you have no control over to change?
I think what bothered George a lot about that was, I think they had thought first about the fans. Disney's vision of what the fans wanted. Maybe not what the fans actually wanted, but what they thought the fans wanted. And I think that bothered George because that's never the way that George, sometimes he'd consider what the fans wanted. Maybe Darth Maul he'd considered, but I think most of the time, he saw himself as an artist, because you make what's in your heart. You make what you make. You do the effort. You do the work. And then when it's out there. People can enjoy it or they can hate it. George never complained that the fans didn't like this or that. He did sometimes complain about, things that the fans wanted that he's never going to do. But even before episode 2, like, George knows full well going into episode 2, he said, in the making of, he goes, yeah, some guys are not going to like this movie because you've got this really kind of overarching romantic dialogue, very, very, that this is going to be very much not what some of those guys are going to like. So he knows that, and he does it anyway because it's what he wants to do. And he's like, no, this is what I want. And actually, if you look today, if you still go, I love the prequels and I'm a guy, but if you look through like IMDb, the prequels are more favored by women, or at least they used to be on average. So I think he was right that, there's going to be some guys that check out of this. They're just going to say, nah, I don't buy it. But George didn't care. He just do what he wants.
Yeah. So. Well, like you said, he's an artist. He's brilliant, really, when you think about it. Just the different styles of things he adds to it. And like you said, he's just going to do it. And that's how you should be, right? You should just be honest, true to yourself, say it how it is. Why bullshit around?
Exactly. I agree. But, I know this is a different franchise, but it's what Gene Roddenberry said when they were launching up Star Trek again. He said, we do take submission scripts and we work with talented writers, but there's never going to come a point where we ask the fans, what do you want? And then we just do it. And he said, the reason why is because he used this term. He said it's creative prostitution. You say, I'm up for the highest bidder and you tell me what to write and I'll write it. And, to a lot of artists, it's just a terrible idea. And I think George is right there with that.
Yeah. You could do that, right? Well, you could do that for a little while, but then it'll get repetitive and it'll be the same thing over and over again. Sometimes there's stories that you may not want, but they need to be told, but in a different way.
Yeah. And sometimes the best story is the one that nobody asked for. And sometimes the story that people want, people disagree about what they want. And you ask 10 fans who get 10 different answers about what they want to see.
Yeah. Take Kenobi, for example.
Right.
Miller, right? That was a book. It's different. It's a story, but it's not around Obi-Wan. It's around the environment. He's just kind of in it a little. It's just great. It's a great story.
That's a really clever idea that he did with that novel, where you take a genre and just say, well, why not do it with Star Wars?
Yeah.
Why not just do a Western? And we'll make Obi-Wan this kind of mysterious man with no name.
Yeah. Just it was perfect. It's a great story overall with a lot of different, you know, the Tuscans and the arc in there with that. It's just great. I love it. I think I'm rambling on now, but I just wanted to continue on like you meant.
Yeah.
And I could see how the prequels were liked more by women. The love stuff that was in there. And some of the moments, I know people they're quirky and we've talked about this before, but there's some really good scenes in there too.
Yeah, you know, with the dialogue, this is one thing I want to mention is that George has sometimes been criticized for the dialogue by a lot of people. And George has said, you know, he doesn't really like to write. But a lot of people don't know this, that, you know, a lot of writers don't like to write if they're writing in Hollywood, but they do it anyway because you got a story in your head.
Yeah.
Got to get it out.
You have to, yep.
But George, you know, I'll just put it this way. The dialogue that he wants to imitate, if you ever watch an old movie from the very beginning of like the talkies, so like if you watch like Wuthering Heights from like 1939,
okay,
you're going to find the same dialogue as in the prequels. And that's what George is going for. He wants to do this kind of dramatic, hard on your sleeve thing. And he's kind of combining a little bit with some Flash Gordon-y stuff where we have catchphrases and we say lines and stuff. And he wants it to be fun, but he also wants it to be, the thing about Star Wars is people say what they feel in Star Wars.
Yeah.
And in real life, I mean, a lot of people don't say what they feel. But in Star Wars, they do. And that's part of the fun of Star Wars is that there is, to me personally, I've always liked that. Even when I was a kid, I knew that they talk different in Star Wars than we do in our world. But that was part of the fun, part of the charm, is that you could really pump out your chest with your lightsaber and say a kind of Star Wars line that no one would say.
Right.
But you would have fun with that, and that's or you know, even in the romantic things, you go, no, I truly, deeply love you, and before we die, I want you to know. I mean, no one says that, but you could really go into it like it's dramatic thing, and that was the fun part of Star Wars, is that it was operatic. It's just this fun kind of other space. So I have to tell you, I've always resisted, especially in the new material, the canon material. I've always resisted the attempt to make Star Wars dialogue the way we speak, or like some kind of snappy dialogue, which maybe Joss Whedon would write or something for the Marvel films. And that doesn't, you know, I have to admit to you that the prank call that Poe, I think, pulls in the beginning of Last Jedi, it didn't work for me. And that's not the only one. You know, the Force Awakens has these lines, you know, you talk first, I talk first.
That was good. Yeah. I did enjoy that. That's really clever. Yeah.
It's funny, but sometimes for me, there's a Star Wars humor. And then there's other humor, which I can notice sometimes, detect it and go, this may be funny on its own, but it feels like the whole, I remember when he goes, and I can't understand you under the mask. Well, in Star Wars, people just have masks. It's their face. That's what they look like.
Yeah.
And so you don't want to draw attention to it because it's all make-believe. So if we make jokes about it, it's like we're doing Robot Chicken in Star Wars.
Kind of takes it away, yeah.
So I always liked it where you would have this kind of thing. So sadly, I think a lot of people who criticize, especially the prequels, but all the films, kind of miss what George is going for. I can't blame them. They don't necessarily have a reference. They don't see anything else trying to do it. I mean, that's the funny thing with George is he's like, well, I'm going to pull from medieval stuff. I'm going to pull stuff. I don't want method acting. I want to do earlier acting, like from the 30s and from the silent movies. And the thing is, you know, people criticize like Hayden Christensen's performance. And what they don't realize is that what they want is a type of acting that George doesn't want. And what they don't even know exists is what George wants. And so if you've never seen something before, you might think it's a mistake. I mean, when Claude Monet did the Impressionism paintings, which I love Impressionism, but when he was doing those paintings where you could see the brushstrokes and everything is really artsy, back from the late 1800s, I mean, before that, you have these still life, very realistic looking portraits. And he's doing this other kind of like thing, which is it's not abstract, but it's kind of like a dream. And people, when they first saw it, they thought there was something wrong with it. You're not a good painter. You know, you're supposed to do this other thing, and you're not doing the thing you're supposed to do. And that's what George was kind of complaining about in 2012, where he's saying, people want you to do a certain formula. They want you to do this way. And if you don't do this way, then they say you're wrong. But that's the thing. George and a lot of people who are creative say, why do we have to do this box? There's actually a lot of other things that people have done before. I want to do that. But if you've never seen that before, then you might go, what the heck is he doing? He doesn't know what he's doing. He's really confused and mistaken, but it's just a different style,
Yeah, and it worked.
Yeah, it worked for me, worked for kids,
Worked for, yeah. The way that he, like you were saying, he takes things from older films that a lot of folks aren't familiar with or watch or you forget, but implements it in his own way, kind of in a modern sense. And I don't think there was anything wrong with anything in the prequels, really, that I can think of. I mean, Attack of the Clones isn't really my favorite one to watch. It's growing on me. But, like, I didn't have a problem. I thought Hayden Christensen's performance, you mentioned that. I thought he did great throughout the whole series. Even to see him back in the Kenobi series. I thought he was just, he was right on point, in my opinion.
He's always, George has always been great with casting. He had I forget the name of the woman who helped him do that. She was the casting director for the prequel. She was great. And Trisha Bigar, who did the costumes. I mean, the costumes are perfect. I think, I sometimes see this comment where people go, George is a great ideas man, but he's not a great director. And this is just one of those things where I have to 100% disagree, because from a film perspective, I know people sometimes might laugh at you and say, what, you like the prequels from a film perspective? Absolutely I do, because if you look at the way that these shots are composed, we're talking film 101 here, and it's done really well. So, I mean, I'll give an example. At the end of, you mentioned Attack of the Clones, so we'll use that one. At the end of Attack of the Clones, usually in film language, when something moves from left to right on the screen, that usually means progression forward, either in time or progress is being made towards a goal. But if you go from right to left, usually in film language, if you're a director, that means we're going backwards, something's wrong. And then if you have a character or a group of characters, they move from right to left, and then they move from left to right, right to left. That gives the audience the idea we're kind of moving in a circle here. We're not going anywhere. We don't know what we're doing. And so if you watch the end of Attack of the Clones, it's very carefully composed. So you see that when the Jedi are surrounded by these droids and stuff, the Jedi are moving from left to right. They're defending themselves. They're defending Anakin and Padme and Obi-Wan. They're defending that, and they're moving in a progression, which sort of they're making progress. They're the ones that are moving in that forward direction, and they're taking on the droids and doing all that. The second the clones show up, everything flips, and now the clones are moving from right to left. And pretty soon, as the battle progresses, we see that they are shooting literally into a dust cloud, and they cannot even see where they're shooting. Yeah. And we get lost in the confusion, and it's almost a narrative. Visually, you're saying this is where the mistake is made. The Jedi partner up with the clones, and that's what does it. And now we're playing Palpatine's game. And then, they go back and back and back, right to left, all the way until they get to Count Dooku's place, and Anakin loses his arm and Dooku gets away. Yeah. So it's directing stuff like that. I mean, it's there. It's right there. But people miss this. They don't evaluate him as a director, but he's as much a director as he ever was. In fact, I think Revenge of the Sith is one of the most masterfully composed movies I've seen in the last 30, 40 years in terms of when it was released. Because the way that things are cut, he does a little Godfather trick where you see as Palpatine's raising his arms and Padme's going, this is the end of democracy. You see Anakin's just like taking people out. I mean, and then you still do this thing actually with, who could have done this? Which Jedi killed these people? And then we cut right to Anakin taking everybody out. And it's amazing, Padme is looking out into the Coruscant skyline, and Anakin's doing the same thing. You have a lot of this visual poetry in that movie. Order 66. It's like silent movies, which is where you listen. I mean, if we don't understand what's happening, the director's failing. But if we understand without words, through the music and the visuals, a master director is at work here, and that's what we're seeing. Order 66. There's no words. I mean, when Anakin, when he does what he does, and Yoda drops that cane, we understand what's happened.
Yeah, it hits
And
us.
it's just really powerfully done.
Yeah.
And that movie is cut seamlessly. I mean, if you think about it, we are moving. It's very hard to write a story where you're moving from this part of the galaxy to that part of the galaxy in a heartbeat, and for everyone to understand what's happening.
What's going on?
With the Order 66, we're going to worlds we've never seen and we'll never see again. And so you're going like in quick cuts, and for everybody to understand what's happening is just really well done.
Yeah, you said it, powerful. The whole impact, the scenes. Like I saw that Anakin and Padme, and they're both have that yeah, and it's an emotional level too.
Yeah,
I'll say that
it's very emotional. I mean, that's really why I think George has always said that he wants his movies to be accessible to kids, because what are the things that kids use to watch movies with? Is their eyes more than their ears.
Yeah,
they are watching what's happening, and they'll understand something if it's visual. That's why cartoons are always so successful.
Spot on. We were talking about some funny moments before, and in The Last Jedi, when Rey is, Luke decides to train her, and she's sitting on the rock, and get up there and reach out now, and she puts her hand out, and then he's got the leaf, and he starts to tickle her hand, and he's like, "Can you feel that?" I do. It's the Force. I just started laughing. I forgot about that little moment, and then he slaps her hand. But it was it was good. It was a clever. I like how they throw them in there.
Yeah, Mark. He even though he had his disagreements, he played the role as
he
well
did
as
his
he could do. Yeah, and I have nothing against Daisy. I think she's a fine actress, but
no.
Yeah, I mean, you have these actors who, when you're an actor, you don't get to decide what you do, but you can try to make the best of what you've got.
Yep. Yeah, and he played the part. He did what he had to do.
Now, I know we've kind of gone in a different direction, but I know you had these up. If you wanted to talk about the infographics more, I could probably mention a couple of things about them.
Sure. Yeah. I was going to bring this one up here. This was a little excerpt from Luke here about attachment, how he wasn't going to have that. Wasn't going to be a part of his way of teaching. Okay. I wanted to get your thoughts on the attachment.
I love this. This is from the Jedi Path. I was just looking through that, and I put these things together from it, just Luke's little notes. And I just love this because this, for me, is the heart of Luke. Which, yeah, it's...
Water. Drop my water if you didn't hear that.
Well, if you want to grab it, that's fine.
Yeah.
But
go ahead. I'm listening. Yeah.
I'll just say that Luke, I said it's the heart of Luke, but yeah, heart of Luke is Luke's heart. The fact that this is a person who sees immense value in his friendships and in his family connections. And that, for me, is how he reaches his father. That's how he finds his path. Yeah. And so for me, his Jedi Order, which is based more on this idea of loving kindness, this kind of balanced thing where we almost have a little family environment going on in Yavin where we all are helping each other and we're friends, and people do date eventually, and it's no issue for him. And of course he mentions Mara. Yeah. I just love that because for me, when I see the end of Return of the Jedi, I understand there's different takes on this. To my surprise, I know that Filoni and different people have different ways they read this, but I read Return of the Jedi as a really positive ending where Luke is free to go in his own direction. He is found his own path. Yep. And the path that I think he's found is one which is based on connection. And so I think I love these quotes because it shows how Luke has learned and grown from the old Jedi Order.
Yeah, I love it. And I've always thought that was an issue with the Jedi code of the attachment, because you're right, Luke, he opened up. You nailed it. He totally learned and grew from the old path and setting his course. And I think that's why why there's so much negativity towards what happened with the sequels, because had not this changed things, if you understand what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, and even George had different ideas about this. Sometimes he thought Luke had kids. Sometimes he thought he didn't.
Right.
But or that he was married. Sometimes he didn't think so. But ultimately, for me, even if he were to disagree, I still would hold fast to this idea that Luke finds his own path, and it's this connective one. So I think at the end, any other path for Luke is a baffling one for me.
Yeah. Great. Bring up this one here too. I wanted to talk about this because you mentioned this book earlier, the Black Fleet Crisis.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
This was a fun one to do. This is the most recent infographic I did.
Yep.
Yeah, it was kind of funny finding out about this. I mean, the novels, the way that they worked at this time in the 90s, mid-90s, they're all going across George's desk. And so, Black Fleet Crisis, the fact that, he originally has this idea that Chewie's going to have a bunch of wives, man of the turrets of the Falcon and all this. And you have George going, I presume it was George, but I know he was going through the outline, so I think it probably was him going, well, I didn't like it, but we did give Chewie a family already. And the thing that we're not going to talk about, which is, the holiday special, which of course George famously hated. But yeah, I mean, I think it's fascinating that because of this crazy suggestion, or maybe not so crazy, depending on your point of view, we ended up sort of nailing down, yep, he has a family. And that the basic threadbare notes of holiday special is real. I mean, George did give them like a basic template for holiday special, but then they went in their own direction.
Right.
Yeah.
There was another one here that I was reading earlier. I'm going to page through. We can come back to a couple of these others. I know we were talking earlier about some information and articles about the Jedi Apprentice series, which I know we're both a fan of. Jude Watson, Dave Wolverton kicked it off. So I thought this was really cool that you put this together.
Yeah, Insider would sometimes do these really cool features. Jacen Fry, you see there, eventually became a pretty big guy in Star Wars. But, I love Watson. For me, has done some of the best character work in Star Wars. And I would have loved if she had ever done like a Ben Skywalker youth. It would have been great. But you see here in this side portion on the right-hand side that, there is some input even coming in from George about, we want to keep Darth Maul's origins mysterious. We want to, and Watson herself, when she's writing this, I wish I had the video. I don't. She talked about George's input. I know that she did have access to the scripts long before they were, made into films for the prequels, so that she could kind of guide what she was doing. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, this is a great little piece about her too, because I was trying to look for things about her. We talked about her last time, and this is just her pen name, but she had a great time writing these, and she just knocked these out of the park one after the other, and it would be great. That would have been awesome if you could have somehow got your hands on that, or to hear her, with the interview about that.
I would love that. In fact, I tried hard and I couldn't find it, but I as far as I know, she has never given an audio interview about Star Wars. It would be something great for her to do. So if there's any intrepid, if you ever want to interview her, it'd be a landmark moment. There's never happened before.
Well, I've tried to find her to reach out to her, because I wanted to do it after I got done reading the books, because I mean, obviously they don't take you too long, but there's 19 and then 2 special editions. I mean, that's a little bit of reading time if you got other things going on.
Yeah, I used to always read the special edition. Deceptions. I would just read that over and over again.
Yeah, it's good. So I've tried, but I can't reach her.
Oh yeah, I suppose. These authors are not always easy to find, but
yeah, and I mean, a lot of times pass too, and
yeah.
But
this is a little excerpt here from Heart of the Jedi, which, as you guys know, this is kind of apocryphal tale, but pretty cool, and
yeah,
it's sitting right next to me right now. But yeah, I always thought this was an interesting. That first chapter was extraordinary, I thought, and Luke's attitude of going, we see, this is so fast. I just want to note this. If you read the EU, you've got Trusa Bakura.
Yep.
You've got Luke Skywalker in the Shadows of Mindor. And you got Heart of the Jedi all taking place roughly around the same time. And I don't think any of those guys are coordinating with each other. But somehow they're all writing Luke in the general similar frame of mind, which is that somehow all these authors have the same instinct, which is that in the year or so after Return of the Jedi, Luke is trying to figure out, am I in the military or am I a Jedi? Like, what am I?
Yeah,
what
where am I
doing
going?
here? Like, and so you see that here where he's like, I don't want to have to kill more stormtroopers. It's not something I want to have to do. But we have to win the war, so what do I do? Why couldn't they just surrender? So you see Luke having this kind of crisis, and I just was inspired to sort of put this together based off that.
Yeah, this is great too. I want to say that I love the way that you put these out there, my friend. Like, seriously, it's great. Like, this one stuck out to me right away. I just love how everything it makes you want to read these. Okay, you do a fantastic job grabbing people's attention.
Thank you. I'm so glad to hear you say that. Yeah, this is just one that it was so visual in my mind when I read it. I just thought this would make for a perfect little panel.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it grabbed my attention. Here we got some more with, excuse me, George and the Bantam Arrow. We got the Darksaber, the courtship of Princess Leia. I love that novel. I love Dave Overton. I wish we could have got more with him as an author. But just the way that he talks about Luke here in his interaction with George, how he was able to make him talk to animals and such.
Yeah, and you see some of that actually come up with Jacen. So one of the things that, I don't know if it was straightforward like this, George knew about Jacen and Anakin and all that, but where George, one of Jacen's main things as he grows is he's interacts with animals, empathizes with animals. That was something that did come from George. George wanted the Jedi to be able to do this. You see here that it's kind of established with Dave. And, I find there's some comments that Dave gave over the years when he was living that were really tantalizing, where he would just talk about how George was really positive about what he did and wrote him this letter afterwards about it. And it does make you wonder to what extent George maybe might have dipped into courtship of Princess Leia. It's an interesting little nugget there. Unfortunately, we can't really
it's hard
ask Dave now.
Yeah.
But, in the case of some of this, I mean, going with Darksaber, going to George and saying, hey, can we kill this character? And that's the level at which there's involvement here. And Rogue Squadron surprised me that, that's going to George and we're saying, no Mandalorians and the Rogue Squadron. But yeah, it's fascinating. I absolutely love the fact you can see right here at the top of this infographic, this interview with Tom Dupree, who no longer living, but he used to be editor at Bantam. Him talking about, we talked last time about how Dark Empire kind of got past George. He didn't see that, Boba coming back and Palpatine coming back. George was like, what?
Yeah, no clones.
But, he didn't know about that. But in the case of Tom Dupree's with Bantam made their deal a little bit later down the line. And so that was a little bit after when Dark Empire got going. Dark Empire is getting going like 88, 89. Bantam deals happening 90, 91. And so Tom over at Bantam, they get this idea that we should ask George some basic questions, to really understand what we're doing here. And so you see right here, right from the get-go, right for the Thrawn trilogy, they're asking him, hey, can Han and Leia have kids?
Yes.
And George is like, yeah. And, can they do this? No. You're getting these answers from George, and he's saying, I don't want you to focus on Yoda. Don't do that. And then, here, Drew Struzan, just a huge props from George. George always wanted Star Wars products to be nice. It's actually the main reason that he took control of the merchandising, not just to promote the film, but it wasn't because he thought it was going to be a cash cow. It's because he had seen that a lot of the tie-in toys and stuff for other sci-fi was awful.
Yeah.
So he wanted to make sure the quality was always there. And so in the case of this, he's commissioning people who did the film posters. He's asking Drew Struzan, I want you to do I want you to do the covers for the novels like you would do a film poster. And that's just really amazing. I mean, on the one hand, he's keeping his friend employed, Drew Struzan, but he's also saying, I want these novels to look professional. And, you know, when it comes to the EU and how serious Lucasfilm treated it, I mean, I'll put it to you this way. George might have had ideas in his head, but the fact that they're going to him for approvals and he wants it to look official, he wants it to look just like the films, indistinguishable on the cover. He wants it to look just as professional. I think that kind of tells you the way he was viewing it at the time.
And they did a great job with that. Like, fantastic.
Oh, yeah, I love those paintings.
They grab your attention, like you said, they grab your attention. And they tell you right away, it makes you want to read them. I mean, I do like some of the new Essential Legends covers that they're coming out with.
Yeah.
But some things you just can't compare to other things, even though it's the same. You kind of understand what I'm saying?
Oh, yeah, totally. It gives a classic feeling.
Yeah, it does.
Yep.
It's perfect for its time era. We'll say it that way.
And, you know, they kind of were extensions of the films, so it feels right that they look like that.
Yeah, and here we got some more talking with illustration. We got Ralph McQuarrie here, Mr. Kevin J.
This one was mind-blowing, you know, but yeah, all three of them were working on this thing. I mean, it was really important to George, this book.
Yeah.
And George is dropping these little nuggets, you know, this is what this is like, and this is not what that's like. And, you know, he's working actively with those EU guys in the 90s.
And they did their thing, that's for sure.
I mean, it's very, very similar to what's happening, you know, when he works with the Clone Wars guys, where he is saying to them, you know, he's saying to Filoni, you can do this, don't do this. You know, a lot of time Filoni came up with the stories. George is just kind of giving these guideposts.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to bring this one up here. This I thought was pretty good. I know this is I believe it's a fan.
Yeah.
But the Dark Empire movie poster. We were talking about movie posters.
I could be wrong, but I think this is illustrated by Mark Bush or Matt Bush or some name.
Oh, really?
Like that.
Okay.
And yeah, this, as you can see, it's a Dark Empire movie poster. It's neat. It's got that crazy color gradient of Cam Kennedy.
He's just so good. That whole series is so good, man.
I really look forward to that episode 3 animated episode that Wilkins Animation will put out for the 3rd issue. Yeah, be great.
You know, just fantastic. So yeah, this is just some of the material that you have up there for everyone to look at and how you composed it. And it's just so much. I was even listening to some of the interviews about that. I shouldn't have, but about the new Jedi Order, how they came up with everything and the roundtable discussions. And it's just there's so much to take in. It's great what you've done, man. It truly
Thank you.
is.
Yeah, it's cool to be able to contribute, and it's always nice that people are interested. That's one of the neat things about having a media that a lot of people enjoy, is that you find something interesting and someone else finds it interesting too.
Yeah, well, it does, especially when you don't know much about it. Okay, and it's just it opens your eyes and it makes me dig deeper and really understand and connect better with the characters that I'm reading about or learning about.
Yeah, and a lot of these authors, just like George did, they're putting their interests and their heart and soul into this.
Yeah, I
mean, you're not going to have a unifying force if James Luceno doesn't write it. You're going to have another book, but you're not going to have the same thing. You're definitely not going to have a Traitor if Matthew Stover doesn't write that, because he is in that book, and his experiences, his vision, and his wisdom. I do think, in order to write something with the heft of the second half of NJO, you have to have acquired some wisdom in your life to be able to write some of that. I mean, how are you going to have Vergere or Jacen or Luke giving wisdom if you've never come across it yourself? So I think some of the insights of lifetimes here is coming into these books.
And that's what makes them so good and powerful, because that's the realness of it.
Yeah,
right?
And one of the cool things about Star Wars is that I think the thing that I am speaking for myself, but maybe I'm speaking for you and for a lot of fans, is that, we talk about George's vision with the films, but of course, film is a collective enterprise. But the cool thing with the EU is that, sure, it followed George's vision, but it also followed James Luceno's vision, and it also followed Timothy Zahn's vision, and Tom Beach's vision, and whether you like it or not, Troy Denning's vision, and everyone has their visions, and it's all getting thrown into this big kettle. this big thing, and that's the neat thing about Star Wars, is that when you look at the richness of the EU, it's like a ginormous club where everybody's saying, well, here's my 2 cents, and he brings in his 2 cents, and we all together are building something that's larger than any of us individually could have done. I mean, NJO itself, we can talk about George's outline approval, we can talk about James Luceno reading every outline, we can talk about Lucy Wilson. They're all very important, but that series, because of having 19 authors, because of coming out the way it is, was no one's own vision. That was a collective vision, that not one person. So even if you ask James Luceno, he's very proud of the series, but he'll even say, well, we did this a bit more than I would have done. Or you might ask somebody, say, well, we went in this direction a bit more than I would have done. But because this is something that's not one person's vision, everybody worked on a team to build this thing it's larger than yourself. It's like being on a baseball team and win the World Series. I mean, no one can do it alone.
Right. The team effort.
Right.
Do you think that...
Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, do you think that's why it is so good, so successful, is because of all that different...
I think it's one of the reasons the EU is successful as a whole. As for NJO, there is a kind of miracleness. I mean, it is a little bit of a miracle. I mean, to think that you can actually stick the landing on the 19th book. I mean, that's a tremendous responsibility to bear. I think that series would be looked at very differently if the last book was a failure.
Yeah.
But the fact of the matter is, I mean, that was an interesting situation. I'm trying to remember who said this. Maybe it was Michael Stackpole, but someone had mentioned how NJO was a story by committee that actually worked. Right? And there's a lot of times where you do story by committee and it doesn't work because everybody has conflicting and clashing ideas. The production of Legacy of the Force was a little tricky because the authors had different ideas of what they wanted. But in the case of NJO, you had, I guess, they would do these story conferences and there would be so much communication between people that, yeah, you had these consistent voices, which were strong. Luceno had a consistent, strong voice in the series. Shelley Shapiro did, and Lucy Wilson did. But those are consistent, strong voices, but at the same time, you have people collaborating. And I think, I'll say this, I think NJO was an interesting, this might be the thing that was the key to its success, aside from the personnel. I mean, I think it's important that Lucy and James and Stover are all so important.
Right.
But I think, and Stackpole. But I think part of the reason NJO is so unique, and it's even unique in Del Rey. I mean, Fate of the Jedi and Legacy of the Force are not like NJO. I think one of the reasons that NJO is so unique is it's this transition time from the Bantam era to the Del Rey era.
Something, yeah.
And so what that means is in the Bantam era, here's how coordination would work in the Bantam era. Timothy Zahn would, I guess Kevin Anderson would call up Timothy Zahn or something on the phone.
Hey,
say, hey,
what are you doing right now?
Yeah, exactly. I'm writing a book. I want to do this thing. Are you using this character? Cool. We'll do that. And that's how virtually all the collaboration worked. There was collaboration, but it didn't come from Lucasfilm. It was coming from the authors just calling each other and saying, hey, I want to do this. Is this cool?
By the way, you still owe me $5. All right. Call me back.
Pretty much. And then you have Michael Stackpole. He's sending over Timothy Zahn some chapters from iJedi going, here's where, this is where Corran is talking to Luke about what went down. When you have Luke and Mara talk, you could use this about, and so everybody's using this and they're just talking it's just like a big friend group. Everybody's just talking. And if you want to kill a character, you say, hey, is it okay? I want to use your guy. And so you get into NJO and like Kathy Tyers, she calls up Timothy Zahn. Hey, could you do a proof on balance point? Because I wrote Mara. I want to make sure that I got it right.
Got it.
Says, okay, sure. And then you have stuff in NJO. So you got this interesting thing where you have Lucy Wilson and Shelley Shapiro and Sue Rustini leading this effort, and James Luceno leading this story, this overarching story. But down in the trenches, you've got these authors firing off 1,000 emails a day at each other, going, "Hey, I want to do this. Hey, I want to do this. Let's do this." And there are some times that how do I put this? It's kind of like recess, and you're being like a school monitor or a hall monitor or something. It's like sometimes the kids are coming up with something that you didn't really say they could do, but then it turns into something cool, and you're like, okay. I mean, and so I think with NJO that kind of happened where we stuck to the general outline, but when there was freedom, the authors were coordinating, saying, "Hey, let's do this. Sure, let's do this." And sometimes it would go in directions that maybe it was better than what Lucasfilm thought, but it wasn't what they expected. And so, I think it was that meeting point between the Bantam era where you just have authors talking, and then the Del Rey era, where as Del Rey went forward with Legacy of the Force, to try to eliminate that, they reduced the number of authors to 3. And then they would have a lot more top down, where we say, we're meeting and we're deciding we're going to do this. The irony is that even though from Lucasfilm's perspective, that might have been their sound strategy, judging on who you are, I think a lot of people agree that the NJO flows better than Legacy of the Force does. And it's probably because the authors were, even though there's fewer of them, they're doing less of this kind of, hey, I'm going to write you an email. Hey, let's call each other. So yeah, Bantam is this cool meeting point, as NJO is just this mixture of time periods. I mean, even the very basis of NJO is an idea that Timothy Zahn and Michael Stackpole were working on their own. They had this thing called Project Montana. Said, after Vision of the Future, we want to do this thing with these aliens, and it's this big.
Really?
And then Michael Stackpole goes on into the planning room, and they say, "Hey, you're the only one who's read Vision of the Future here. Could you tell us where this is going?" And he goes, "Well, Tim and I were thinking about doing this thing." And they go, "Hey, what if we combine that with the Dark Horse ideas, and we bring in what Lucy's talking about, and then we take in what George is saying, and then James Luceno's like, what about Aztecs?" And say, "All right, we'll do that too.
Put them in there."
And Salvatore is like, "Hey, living ships. We should do living ships."
Yeah.
So it's just, Troy Denning said that the brainstorming sessions that they would have for NJO were just the time of his life. He just loved. They were so much fun.
Oh man.
And so I think that's part of this, is that the authors, it was this real cauldron of creativity. It was just the perfect meeting point between the Bantam and the Del Rey style.
It's like a super group getting together to jam. You know what I mean?
really
just giving her.
I will mention as an aside that they did offer Timothy Zahn to write a trilogy for the NJO, a couple books, 2 or 3 books. He turned it down, but the reason is actually, it's ironic because we're saying this team atmosphere is so great for NJO. Well, that's actually the reason that Tim turned it down. He's kind of works more. He likes to, you notice in these stories, I told you people are calling Tim up, but Tim wasn't necessarily calling. So Tim, he likes to kind of do his thing.
Yeah.
And not write somebody else's outline.
Yeah, I think that's kind of known now about him. He likes to,
but in the end, it kind of worked out because the core idea of NJO was sparked by his idea in the first place, which was, hey, what about these far outsiders coming in? And that was Tim's idea with Mike. Yeah,
that's cool. That's really cool. Yeah, I know people are gonna love this, the new Jedi Order talk that you give, and especially just all this information. My friend, I'm being true here. It's mind blowing. I'm not kidding you. Learning about this is exciting for me. I mean, literally, I'm not gonna lie. I got a list of stuff here. There's more stuff I want to talk to you about. Lucy Wilson. I know you mentioned her a lot. She seems like she played a big important role with pushing the Dark Empire, if I remember correctly, and getting, I'd like to know more about her. But we're only
Lucy,
limited.
She's go ahead.
I was gonna say we're just limited on how much time we can spend all night talking, really. But I've already been up for a while, so my bedtime's coming soon.
yeah, I get that. I mean, it's all interesting to talk about.
Yeah, it's just great, and these stories, and just being we can only imagine being in just a fly on the wall on one of them rooms, like you were saying, where they were all getting together, and it was just a different time era too to do things. It wasn't.
It was, and it was an exciting time because you got the prequels, and you have Star Wars is back, so people are excited about that, and they're excited to work on it at this time.
Yeah, it's awesome. So what do you got? What do you got? Last time we were talking, you were working on some Shadows of the Empire, infographic, getting some stuff together. How's that process coming?
It's good, yeah. So that'll be coming out soon, and I will eventually get some interviews out. I personally, I wasn't as fond of the material that came after the New Jedi Order, but out of a sort of a researcher's attempt to document it, despite the fact that I have my own feelings, I will be putting out interviews that Troy Denning did about the process for Fate of the Jedi, and then also for Crucible, and then for Dark Nest, and then also, he did give some. I think he maybe didn't mean to, but he talked a little bit about his trilogy, which was canceled by the sale, about novels that were after Crucible. And so, I will be putting that out. I don't know when, but I will be putting some of those interviews out. And then there are sort of two other Star Wars projects that have my attention. They're much larger, but they have my attention. But I sort of mystery at this time.
Yeah, no, that's always good, because you take a lot of pride and you put a lot of effort into what you do, and you don't rush nothing. Everything it's just great. I love what you do, truly.
I appreciate you saying that, and I always feel, and I've always felt this way, that if you're going to do something, you might as well do the most you can with it while it's going to be in your attention, because the fact is there's a lot of things to get through in life, and if you're going to spend time on something, might as well give it your best.
Yeah, 100%. And you're knocking it out of the park, my friend, and you're giving us fans a lot of good information, and I appreciate it very much.
Thank you. Yeah, I love talking with you. It's great.
Yes, thank you. We'll have to do this again, because I love chatting with you as well, and learning, and there's way more we can unpack here. I just the new Sith Wars really grabbed my attention. I know we were talking about it prior to, and that would have been really cool to see that transpire. Do you think maybe the Acolyte the series that they're talking about, you think they might dabble with any? I don't know how any of that. I'm just throwing it out there. I know George isn't involved anymore. I know it's Disney's thing, but it seems like they're just kind of tiptoeing around these certain ideas.
I don't know. It's an interesting idea. I mean, I know towards the end there, George was getting more interested in some of more darker, mature takes on Star Wars. Underworld, was famously kind of rated R, and yeah. As for this story, I mean, if you think about it, it's really not a happy story.
Right.
I mean, you got the Sith are running the roost for a long time, and the Jedi are on the run, and they're dying. Yeah. So Republic, I mean, if you've got no Republic that's under any sane control, if the Sith run it, that means you've got everything you can imagine going on, and nobody's doing anything about it. It's a bad time to live. And so, that's a time where if they wanted to take Star Wars in that direction, it might be interesting. But I do sometimes get the feeling that George was willing to take Star Wars in more dark directions than sometimes they've been willing to go lately.
Okay. Very good. Yeah. I just wanted to ask you that. I was just curious, since we were talking about it, because I know they're always touching their toes in areas that haven't really been touched, we'll say. That through the EU.
Yeah, it's possible.
Yeah, we'll see. I don't know.
I will say, the EU has such a vast history. This is why it deserves like a TV show or something that Lucasfilm should do.
Yeah.
Because there's so much there. I mean, it's amazing.
Yeah. We're kind of talking about it. Maybe they'll
Yeah.
hit you up, and I can be the guy. I'd like to actually sit here with an actual microphone in cue cards, like like an old interview or something like this. This is how I'd like to do this. I'm getting antsy. I want to move around, and maybe I'd be like this, trying to hold it. Go ahead, Xezene, talk. Have some fun.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, it's great to have you back. I'm glad this was a fun conversation again. There's so much more that we're just touching the surface here, folks, with everything this gentleman has done. And I hope you enjoy our conversations. I'll link the Reddit page with there's so much there. You can constantly go back and learn something new every day. Trust me. I got pages of notes here. So I'll link that in there. He's got big projects he's working on, more infographics, other things. A mystery man here. Is there any final words or any thoughts that you want to say, sir?
Well, the only thing I'd say is that I appreciate you saying all that, and I'd love to do it again. I would say that, kind of like what we were saying with Traitor and with the philosophy and the mythology, it's interesting learning about the people behind it. But I think for me, and if readers or listeners can get this sense, that maybe it's the best thing you can take from Star Wars is to be inspired by that imagination, or to be inspired by that vision, or the effort to make it, or even some cases, maybe be inspired in your life by the philosophy or some of the ideas. And in that way, it can go beyond Star Wars. It could touch other parts of your life in ways that can sort of enrich you as a person. And I can tell you personally, I've become more interested in certain aspects because of Star Wars. And I think if it can do that, then it's something really special.
Yes, very, very well said. It's beautiful, actually. Yeah, it's true. It plays a vast role amongst a lot of things than just the fantasy aspect of it. Like you said, you could take pieces from it. It could change your life. It's changed mine. It's touched my life. It brought me back, in a sense. It gave me hope. That's what it's done for me so far.
Yeah.
And it's brought me joy meeting people like you and everyone I've talked to, and different walks of life. And it's a great thing. It's so great.
Yeah, to have fun with it. That's what it comes down to.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to say thanks to everyone for watching, liking, subscribe, share. This gentleman needs to get, well, he's known, but I'm glad that I was able to sit down with you and talk, and it's been a pleasure. It truly has. I appreciate it very much.
Cool. It's been good talking with you. You can find my stuff on the Reddit page you mentioned, and then also the HoloNet YouTube channel, where you'll find Underworld, Vector Prime, Legacy Revealed documentary, which is great. So yeah, it's been good talk with you. So thank you.
Yeah. There you have it, folks. Xezene back again, HoloNet. Stay tuned. He's got some more stuff happening. Until next time, see you guys soon.